It is time now for our Sunday group. USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers, Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, and former special assistant for national security to President George W. Bush, Michael Allen. Panelists, welcome.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Jason, Governor DeSantis has taken a fair amount of heat from his fellow Republicans. You had Chris Christie comparing him to Neville Chamberlain. Nikki Haley says he's copying former President Trump. And here's Senator John Thune.
I think that there are lots of different opinions on U.S. involvement in Ukraine, but I think the majority opinion among Senate Republicans is that the United States has a vital national security interest there in stopping Russian aggression.
What does this say about DeSantis' ability to talk foreign policy if and when he's a presidential candidate?
Well, if he does decide to run for president, I would remind people he served overseas in the United States military, very ably. But I think Governor DeSantis takes a position that the majority of the Republican base also takes. I think they're tired of these endless wars. And what the governor is saying, which I think is reflective, again, of what Donald Trump, the former president, is taking, and the majority of Republicans, is, yes, we need to protect vital U.S. interests, but we do not need to necessarily start World War III and get entangled yet again overseas in perpetuity. We've already put more than $100 billion towards this effort. There should be some sort of limitation to how much we do there.
Michael, the Wall Street Journal saying that this was the governor's first big mistake, and making a broader point, quote, Mr. Putin will then set up shop closer to the Polish border and be even stronger as a malign force in Europe. The U.S. will be drawn deeper into the continent's problems, not free to focus on the threat posed by China, which in any event will conclude that the U.S. is weaker. Is that the world President DeSantis wants to inherit on January 20th, 2025? In your view, was this a major political blunder?
I don't think it was a blunder, because I agree that a lot of Republicans are worried about endless wars, and President Biden isn't exactly out there giving a muscular case for why this might be in the United States' interest. But one thing I saw from DeSantis' statement is that he's not an isolationist. He's very worried about China, but China and Russia are in an alliance together. In fact, of course, Xi Jinping is going to Moscow tomorrow to renew his vows with Putin. And the quickest way to deter China from invading Taiwan is to enable the Ukrainians to finish the job as soon as possible against Russia. If we give up now, that does nothing but embolden Xi Jinping, because he believes that the West has no staying power and that we give up at the first sign of trouble.
Let me just jump in here as kind of the skunk at this garden party and say that if Governor DeSantis wants to talk about foreign policy, in answer to your question, Mike, I think he has to understand that Americans' primary foreign concerns at this moment are about China and Russia. And you can't say that I'm tough on China, but I'm weak on Russia, to Mike's point, right? You have to understand that China and Russia are, in fact, two authoritarian regimes that have a common interest in terms of spreading their ideology, in terms of incursions on other people's land. As Senator Rubio said, it'd be like the United States saying, oh, it's just a matter of a little trouble that we're going to take over Canada or the Bahamas. That's ridiculous. This was a statement, it seems to me, that also was contradictory to what DeSantis stood for when he was in Congress. This is a flip-flop from his position when he was urging President Obama to take a tougher stand against Russia and Putin's incursions into Ukraine when it was 2015, I believe, when he was in Congress. So he's just like saying, either I want to be like Trump or I think this is what the base wants. He's not a leader. He's a follower.
We've got somebody who was in Congress at that point. Do you want to respond?
Look, Obama, the Russians went in and took Crimea. And during the Bush administration, they went in and took 25% of Georgia. So, look, there was not a tough pushback in either of those instances. He's not saying don't do anything. He's like, we have to have balance because, to your point, yes, you have to take care of China. China is the premier concern of this country right now.
To the earlier point, though, this isn't where most of Congress, including most Republicans in Congress, are. But when you look at the polling that shows that you now have 4 in 10 Americans, right, who say that they don't want to have this kind of level of aid to Ukraine at this point, it does show that this is where the Republican base is moving. And it does suggest that there could be a shift, a dramatic shift afoot in the Republican Party at this point in the foreign policy arena.
I agree that Republican support for Ukraine has gone down over the last few months. But if you look really deep into the polling, you can see that Republicans, almost 63%, believe that if Russia were to win, that would seriously impact U.S. national security interests. So what does that tell me? That tells me that Republicans are still very interested in Ukraine, and they want to see Ukraine win. And the counteroffensive is coming very soon. We haven't seen a lot of battlefield action lately. It's felt like a stalemate recently. The spring offensive starts soon, and I think once you see the Ukrainians succeeding again, I think Republican support will be buoyed because they believe they'll see that American assistance is having a great effect.